So our foot is the interface with the earth, and so it would be silly to think that it didn't have some effect on the way the rest of our body moves. Unfortunately today, most of our surfaces are hard and flat, but that probably means our foot has to be doing an even better job because it's out of its natural environment. Its natural environment is to have deep pressure and texture. If you look at the shoes that most people wear, they're cushioned and they're heeled and they're stiff, and so the shoe is even removing you further away from that deep pressure and texture. So when our foot lands, really it's along for the ride at that point, and our hip and our leg and our torso is controlling what happens at our foot, and pronation starts to occur. This is a good thing. If this pronation is the shock absorption of the body, the primary shock absorber of the body, and so if we stop that, say with a shoe or with an orthotic or something like that, or try and control it in an unnatural way, that's not going to be that helpful.
Feet are our foundations. They really are the way we connect with the earth, and yet we take them for granted so much of our lives, often because we are wearing shoes that reduce that connection to our surroundings. And yet the way our feet move really affects the way the rest of our body moves. So when we have problems further away from our feet, it's always worth thinking about what's happening with our feet. In this brilliant conversation with Andy Bryant, who is a podiatrist in Australia, we dive deep into that connection between the foot and the rest of the body, balance, how the big toe affects how we move. We talk about the big toe quite a bit, but also pathologies like plantar fasciitis, bunions, and so on. And also the use of orthotics comes up a lot. If you're someone who is struggling yourself, or you know someone who is, or it's just something you've never really thought about but want to do your best by your whole body, then you'll love this episode. So, Andy, you are a trained podiatrist with a natural foot function perspective, or at least that's the way you describe it on Instagram. And you've been working in this field for many years. So I would call you an expert, but I would call you an expert with an alternative outlook to perhaps some of the rest of the people in your industry. I don't know. Now I talk a lot about barefoot shoes, releasing the feet, feeling the ground, loving your feet, and so on, because that's been part of my journey. But I find that when I talk to others about it, there's quite a lot of resistance. There's also quite a lack of knowledge as well about pretty much the importance of our feet, the role they take in our movement world. Obviously, until something goes wrong for them. And then suddenly they're all over it, which is sad, because that's usually later in the day than you would like, I'm sure, which is why you are educating all the time to try and help people avoid that situation. But I'd like to start with your story, because I was fascinated to read that whilst you were doing your training, I believe, at university, you were actually suffering from foot problems yourself. Is that correct?
Yes, for sure. And I think a lot of podiatry students become podiatry students because they've had some experience with podiatrists. Maybe other professions are like that as well. Yeah, thanks for having me on anyway, Wendy.
Pleasure.
So yeah, I was an elite middle distance runner, and probably trying to transition from being a junior to a senior a bit too readily, and doing too many kilometers. And this is like 30 or 25 years ago, or just over 25 years ago. And so there wasn't the focus on strength training. Like we all probably say, if I only knew then what I knew now. But so I had a series of shin splints, which turned into stress fractures. So that's on the inside of on the bone on the inside of the leg, gets stress on it from running too much. And the treatment, because I was at podiatry school, was to use orthotics. But I ended up just quitting running because the orthotics didn't really, I still got stress fractures afterwards. And right. So I quit running, probably for 20 years, really, but that's okay. Well, maybe it's not. But
and how did you feel about that though? Was it kind of a goal and a dream lost by having to quit?
100%. Yeah. Like I was at a level where, the Sydney Olympics were coming up, and that was a goal, so, probably not a realistic goal ever, but I was at that level where, had things gone well, maybe that could have happened, so,
right.
So it was a big thing, but as humans do, we adjust and adapt. And so I became a cyclist, and then, got into my career, and really forgot about running, but it was always like a big part of it. And the funny thing was I was still wearing these orthotics that I'd made or had made for me at university, even though I wasn't running anymore, for this perceived foot problem that I probably never even really had. It was just the way we treated things when we were at podiatry school and the way podiatrists treated it. And so I went out into podiatry practice. But before I did that, I was really thinking I don't want to be a podiatrist. I prefer to educate people. Like I was really enjoying educating the clients in clinic, in the student clinic. And so I thought maybe I'll become a lecturer. And I did an extra year where I did some lecturing of the undergraduates, but you were allowed to work then. And I think working, I was like, oh, well, there's money in that. And I'm still educating. And so and then I got some good opportunities, and I started in a quite a big practice that I was a partner in pretty early on, and just sort of got swept up in practice. But I always underprescribed orthotics, maybe because there was a gut feel about them not being 100%, or just thinking, not everything's right. And, fast forward about 15 years or 17 years maybe, I was an elite cyclist by then and had a series of head injuries from falling off over 2 years, which is a bit random. But, like they were fully weird accidents, like a kangaroo jumping out in front of me.
Oh, my goodness. That's not something you hear much in the UK.
Yeah. Like we were in a bunch sprint and I jumped away from the front of the bunch to try, because I wanted to be safe, because I was never a sprinter. I was more of a hill climber. So I thought I'll go for the early win, And so I was out on my own, and the kangaroo jumped out in front of me, not in front of the bunch. So really random stuff happened. That meant I couldn't cycle anymore. But I'm a very physical, movement-based person. And so for some reason, and I still don't know to this day, possibly because I had those series of concussions, so my memory's a bit shady. I ended up in a yoga class, and I became quite into yoga and really like embracing it. And noticed, obviously, I didn't have my orthotics on because I didn't have shoes on, but noticed my feet getting stronger by good cueing. Like if for those of your listeners that do yoga, there'll be the cueing of the back foot in Warrior 2, where you have to ground down on the outside blade of the foot. And you pull up your arch. I'm like, oh wow, my arch comes up. Not that I ever thought I had flat feet or anything like that, but I could control my feet. Whereas at uni, we're kind of taught, and I think it's still taught this way, that the muscles that your foot is your foot, and you can't really adapt or change your foot. Similarly, and the analogy was used similar to the eyes, like the muscles in the foot are very small, like around the eyes, and so you can't really train them. And anyway, I was noticing I could train my feet. I was noticing people at the gym, because I'd started going to the gym for the first time in my life, training barefoot. And I was kind of looking into this and looking for that cardio outlet. And so I thought I'll run again, and went back. And but then I was like, oh, well, should I run without shoes on, or should I run in a way that's more natural? Because I was really getting into this barefoot stuff at the gym and yoga. And so I went for a run in a pair of Adidas trainers, which were not like runner trainers. They were like casual trainers, which are really flat and flexible. And my calves just locked up. They just could not cope with being in a shoe so flat. And I was like, oh, this is crazy. But I didn't stop, because I stopped running probably that day, but I didn't think, oh, that's the end of that. I just thought, oh, my calves aren't up to it. And then I trained my calves. And I sort of retrained myself to run again. And now I run regularly. So that's like maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I got a bit competitive again, but then I noticed that that's not really good for me to be competitive. So now I just run.
Interesting.
Now I just run to keep my dogs
healthy. A few decades on. That's right. Yeah, exactly. Knowing yourself somewhat more, knowing what's good for you. Yeah.
Yeah. So now I just run to keep my dogs happy, and because I enjoy it. But I don't do anything competitive anymore, and I just run in either barefoot on nice soft surfaces, or in barefoot shoes, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Shoes that just let my foot do its thing. My calves are fine now, because they adapted to that. And so it was a huge transformation for me. I obviously got rid of my orthotics. I then changed the way I practice, and which is a huge
I was going to ask that, because obviously suddenly you would have such a different perspective, and it's. I mean, it's probably brilliant from your client's perspective, because you've been there. It's your lived experience rather than just something you've been taught and you're not quite sure. Apart from sort of testing things out on lots of different clients, it's actually your body.
Well, that's the hardest. It was the hardest part, because I had clients that were long-term orthotic users through my not persistence, through my advice. And so then when
Yeah.
they were coming in for like a recover or a review, I was having to explain that there's a different way. And I think it was probably testament to my relationship with my clients, all of them that I had that conversation with were like, okay, yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. So then
Amazing.
that was a powerful thing. I was in a practice that wasn't really conducive to this way of practicing. And so I went out alone. That was about 2020. And just now I just work on my own without any staff and just do what I call natural podiatry or rehab podiatry, as well as still cutting some, elderly people's toenails, because that's a bit of downtime in between the intensive chronic cases that I now attract, because I think there's a lot of podiatry that doesn't work for people, and they're the ones that I then end up seeing. Yeah, so that's kind of my story.
So you've become the end of the road guy.
Yeah, which is a bit hard sometimes. I wish it was easier.
Yeah, and probably from the perspective emotionally very hard, because they're coming to you feeling like there may be no other way, and that's that. And actually, I know from having been in pain myself for years in my feet, not my back, that you're desperate for someone's help, and although at the end of the day it is actually you that's going to have to get yourself better, realistically you're so desperate for someone to just say I can help here, and most people can't really say I can help you because they don't know that they definitely can, and they don't know that you're going to put the work in, so you're never quite sure of that balance. But and a lot of the people I work with still now, it's about their side of the deal. I think that when you work with people, you're a catalyst, aren't you? And you're, as you say, you're educating and you're motivating though. But a lot of it is about confidence, giving people back some confidence to say there is possibility to change. There is possibility to progress and improve, no matter what stage you are in your journey or where you see your stage in your journey.
Yeah, and so I reckon now I've come full circle. I often reflect on this, and now I'm back to being that educator. My main tool is education. Like I saw a young, a 14-year-old today with the start of bunions, which is where you get that the base of the big toe, the big the joint coming out there, and like for her, it's all about education. Really, a 14-year-old is probably not going to be that committed to an exercise program that's going to stop her having pain in 30 years' time. And so it's about educating her as to why shoes are important, why toe spaces are important, why moving in a certain way is important. And so that was interesting. And the other thing that I just thought of was a client I saw yesterday, another new client who had such a shopping list of issues and was just sort of wrung dry with, they were so exasperated with where she was at with her feet. And I definitely don't promise that I can help, but I just, spend time and listen and unpack it all. And at the start, you said I was experienced, and I feel like that experience just, okay, well, I've seen that before, and I've seen that before, and that means that, and you can just like problem solve to some extent, but also just sort of calm the situation down and give some hope that that there's something that hasn't been tried that's worthwhile trying, that they all get better. Not everyone has like 40 years of foot pain, sometimes 10 years, but not 40 years. They'll get better, and there are things out there. So, but again, education, that was the key, that I was using my voice more than I don't use any manual skills really. And I'm teaching people how to exercise themselves or move better rather than, oh, here's a product, there's no product.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting, great segue into foot function, because I think when I started to, I needed to grasp at anything I could find when I was in pain. I was looking at everything from all angles. I was deep diving. And at that point, my husband and best friend had both tried barefoot shoes, and I'd said, why would you wear them? They're really not very nice looking, are they? And aren't they quite uncomfortable? And, why would you do that? So I'd let them have their little go. Then I got into pain. And obviously, again, when you hit problems, you hit problems. And someone said to me, look, I know it's your pelvis, your back that you're in pain with, but have you thought about the fact that your foot is your foundation? And, I know you haven't got pain there, but it might also be affecting some of the rest of your body, the way it stabilizes itself and so on. And I was running at the time, and it was running that got me into my problems. And I had to stop very suddenly overnight. And I haven't run a distance run since. So I can run to the bus easily, no pain. I can run around. I can go really fast, very quickly, all no pain. So I'm very pleased with that. I may go back to running at some point in my life. I don't know. Maybe post-menopause, once the hormones have calmed. Because for me, hypermobility was the main thing that showed up dysfunction. And basically, I ended up being a bit of a bag of jelly that needed to be ungelatinized or whatever. I needed to get strong in good functional patterns. And one of those things was understanding the role the foot had to play in everything else. And I thought, at least I know if that's working well, or as well as it could be, then that's one thing I've ticked that I know is not creating part of the issue. So I transitioned to barefoot shoes at that point, slowly, although I've always walked around my house barefoot, so it wasn't too difficult for me. And I've always loved walking sort of at the beach and so on. But what I noticed when I was fully in barefoot shoes was how different I walked, how I got faster, how I was more upright, and how I enjoyed the sensation in my feet that I don't think I'd had for an awful long time. So can you tell us a bit more about how the foot affects the function of the rest of the body, to try and make that link about the fact that it is one cohesive unit, mind, body, and all?
Yeah, sure. So our foot is the interface with the earth, and so it would be silly to think that it didn't have some effect on the way the rest of our body moves. Unfortunately, today most of our surfaces are hard and flat, but that probably means our foot has to be doing an even better job because it's out of its natural environment. Its natural environment is to have deep pressure and texture, and if you look at the shoes that most people wear, they're cushioned and they're heeled and they're stiff, and so the shoe is even removing you further away from that deep pressure and texture. When our foot hits the ground, when our foot lands, that's a better way of putting it, because hits it a bit of a negative connotation.
Yes.
So when our foot lands, really it's along for the ride at that point, and our hip and our leg and our torso is controlling what happens at our foot. And pronation starts to occur. This is a good thing. If our foot's not pronating.
So tell me what pronating means.
We'll get to that.
Okay.
Our foot's pronating, which is it's softening into the ground. It's the way when our heel lands, our arch softens. And you go to some podiatrists, but and physios, other health professionals, or even just a shoe store, and they'll say, "Oh, you're pronating." Well, I would answer, "I hope so," because it's like, can your arm flex and extend? Because our foot should be able to pronate and supinate, and so this pronation is the shock absorption of the body, the primary shock absorber of the body. And so if we stop that, say with a shoe or with an orthotic or something like that, or try and control it, this is in an unnatural way, that's not going to be that helpful. Really, the control of that movement of your foot landing and rolling onto the big toe, so when from our heel landing onto our big toe is pronation. When that happens, that should be controlled by a strong hip, strong legs, and strong calf and ankle. They're in control there. And then when we get to the big toe, we should be able to push off through a straight big toe. And that triggers a whole cascade of effects back up the chain. This is really when, like that first phase, I really think is the body talking to the foot. And then that second phase is more the foot talking back to the body, like giving it.
That's great. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Some guidance. So as we push off through a straight big toe, and a modern shoe or conventional shoes pretty much never let your big toe be straight. They all put it on ankle.
So can I interject there? So when you say a straight big toe, are you still meaning, because obviously the toe from the joint.
Yeah.
So the joint has, you're bending through that joint, and then you're pushing off through the end of the big toe.
Yeah, so I
just
mean,
to really.
Yeah, usually I have my foot models, but I left them at work today. But if this is your big toe, if this is your big toe, if it's bent sideways like this, and you're not pushing off through a straight big toe, I mean, like you want to be able to flex through the big toe, that, but you want to do it in a way that's aligns with the back of your foot, the middle of your foot, so rather than your big toe being sideways.
So it's a straight line with the rest
yes,
of the
this way,
foot.
but flexing that way, flexing straight up and down.
Got it.
That triggers what we call supination, which is the reverse of pronation, just like your arm flexes and extends. So we have pronation and supination. And so that triggers the muscles in the foot to fire, to stiffen the foot. As we push off, it lights up all the muscles on the inside of our leg, all the way into a pelvic floor, creating a very strong push-off position that engages our glutes and our whole posterior chain because we've used a straight big toe. And so this is how I see the foot relating to the body. And when I'm assessing someone, I'm seeing, okay, what's happening in this phase and then what's happening in this phase, and how do we, like if someone's really good at the pronating bit, maybe too good, we need to build in some hip strength to control it a little, or maybe some inside ankle strength to control it a little bit, that rolling in. But then often that foot is not so good at the pushing off bit. So we've got to get better at strong calves and strong on the inside of the ankle, and strong feet in that sense, like the little muscles in the foot. There are a lot of little muscles in the foot. So that's how I see the foot relating to how it functions with the rest of the body. There's also internal and external rotation happening. And so that can affect further up the chain, all the way up to the thoracic and the neck. And so we want that to time correctly. But that said, every step is, like on this hard, flat land that we live on, a lot of our steps are more normalized than they would have previously been. And so the human is highly adaptable. And I think we get used to those things. But when problems start up, it can sometimes be because we didn't get used to them well enough. And so that's when we might have to make a change and go back to the way we're meant to move. And it's, yeah. So, I don't know if that answers that question.
No, it does. Yeah. Absolutely, it does. And certainly certain things can happen to feet from traditional footwear, where presumably if we go back to that alignment of the big toe and the push off, where that becomes compromised because the toe is kind of permanently not at the right angle, just at rest, when it's not even in use. And therefore that sort of nice splay as well of the whole foot, there's no sort of stability even for that big toe, presumably. So then when you are pushing off, if that toe is at a bit of an angle in terms of your balance, the communication, the signals to your brain are all sort of a bit confused anyway as to how to pronate and supinate. And then there can be reaction, which, I always find it's fascinating because it can be such a small thing and people can be kind of a bit like, well, how can I affect just a few degrees or change of this? And doesn't it kind of just come naturally and so on? And my response, you're the one who's here to talk about it, but my response is always, well, yeah, it should. But after the years of onion skin layers of life with all the different shoes we've worn, if you're female, the high heels, and then the walking in thick soled shoes, if you were at school and you were told you had to wear shoes that could be polished, and then the lack of, in my world particularly as well, being able to get up and down off the floor anymore because you haven't been getting up and down off the floor. And, a lot of my clients, I see their big toe particularly is really not very mobile anymore. So they complain that they can't get up and down to the floor, but actually, and sort of we talk about hips and knees and so on, but often the big toe is a big factor in that, where they're sort of pushing off and struggling with that because it's painful because they haven't got the mobility there. And then sort of moving their body around that to compensate, and feeling like the rest of the body is not working as well when, I get people down on hands and knees and we do sort of rocking forwards and backwards, just gently with the toes tucked and untucked, very small moves, but it's amazing the information that someone suddenly gets about their big toes in that position because they haven't sort of taken it to that level for so long. It feels really sort of uncomfortable to them. So you absolutely did answer it. And hopefully that's inspired people to sort of realize the importance of very small things with just even toe alignment. And we'll come on to talk about that in a second. Another thing I wanted to talk about general movement patterns is balance, because again, that's also really related to that big toe situation. And and other things. So can you talk a bit about how the foot helps us or hinders us to balance, or the foot function?
Yeah, so balance, well, in walking, but even more so in running, there's a balance phase in every step where you are pretty much relying on a single leg balance to stay functional. And so I see, so I assess balance with nearly every client to see how well they balance. Okay. And we'll see a whole lot of different compensations. Their ankle working overtime, their toes not really doing. The most common one is their ankle like really working really hard, and then their toes kind of not doing much, and then really not much happening further up the chain, up around the hips or their core. And I think balance should be a combination of the small muscles in the foot, these little intrinsic muscles that start and finish in the foot. They should be working quite hard in balance, and our ankle should be a little quieter, because these long muscles that cross from the foot through the ankle into our calf should be more like a spring, accepting energy and releasing it when we're walking. And so the stability shouldn't come from them. And so when we see someone trying to balance on an uneven surface as a tool, I kind of disagree with this, because that just makes your brain think, oh, my ankle needs to do this work. And if you think about the surfaces, either natural or unnatural of the earth, they're pretty much all firm, and our foot should be able to get a good grip on them by using these little intrinsic muscles. And then our ankle can be left to be free to adapt to the surface. So balance, and then we should get involvement further up the chain. Like if you can cue someone to use to soften their knee, to draw their pelvic floor up, or to engage their hips a little, then they'll get so much better balance because of that. And so it shouldn't just be the foot, the ankle, or up the chain. It should be this combination of all those things. And until recently, I would train people balancing just looking at one spot. But how practical is that? Like mostly when they're in that one step, they're looking around. So I was making it easy for them. So now I have them doing something else, because I think the body innately wants to organize itself in the proper way. So we might have a ball that they're tossing from one hand to the other, and they're watching it with their eyes, taking their focus away from their balance, and setting them up in a way that they can't fail pretty much. So maybe in a split stance. So this is where the foot that they're balancing on is in the front, and their big toe is just behind, but maybe a little set aside. So they're really quite stable, and their brain can work out how to balance using the right combination of those things rather than relying on their ankle or their toes. In terms of the big toe, if we see someone with a bunion, so this is when the big toes push sideways, their balance is generally pretty rough, because the big toe acts as a stopper, so that when our foot goes to roll in balance, if it's in a nice straight position, we can push against it and push back and use it as almost like a curb that just keeps us not going too far.
Like a stabilizer,
it's
almost.
100% a stabilizer.
Yeah.
And so I use that as a cue as well. Like if you practice balancing and you've got your big toe pushed sideways, pull your big toe out and see how much easier it is doing that. And the other analogy I like is, would you ever do a handstand on your hands with your fingers all stuck together? You wouldn't. You'd always do it with your feet stretched out. But that brings me to in gait. We shouldn't just have our feet stretched out, our toes stretched out all the time. They're meant to be able to move in and out. As we push off, they actually should be squashed up. But then as we land, they should spread. And then this is their action. They're meant to move, like the rest of our body. And this is when we see someone like Usain Bolt or LeBron James. They've got really squashed up feet. They're in that pushing off phase all the time because they're sprinters and they're moving so quickly that they don't ever really need to get into that spread phase. They're just like squashed.
So their feet have adapted to that to make them better at it.
Yeah, they have. Yeah. And it looks really wrong because compared to what a natural foot looks like, but it's probably adapted to them being an elite athlete doing a lot of what they do. So because they're just like in that push off phase all the time.
Highly specialized. Yeah.
So that kind of relates to, because some people get this idea that we're meant to just have our toes splayed all the time, and I just want to clear that up. That they're meant to be able to just move, and so that's why we like a shoe that lets them move.
Yeah. And actually looking down then at your own feet and seeing what sort of control you have over the foot and whether you can, with no shoes on, open those toes as you open your fingers, not quite to this range clearly, but those sort of things are a good way to assess your own feet, aren't they, really? Yeah. And there's a lot of I'm not a big fan of posts on social media that are, can you do this? Because lots of people say no, and it makes them feel bad. And I don't think that's the best way of doing it.
Yeah.
But where people are have retrained often their toes to move separately. So lifting the big toe, as we used to do when we were younger, lifting the other toes, which, you know, as we age, as depending on the footwear we've worn and so on, is going to be more or less possible. But so it's not about the specific, can I get from A to B with my toe, blah, blah, blah. It's more about, can you feel movement as well? Have you got some control over those digits so that just to give yourself that information, just to assess, could I get more? Do I want more? Could it benefit me? Could it benefit something else that's going on further up the chain? So have I, you know, if I've got a hip problem or a knee problem, have I ever even thought about what are my feet doing? And perhaps are my toes able to move that well and so on? Because you might have no foot pain at all, but your foot might be affecting your definitely not hip and knee pain.
Yeah.
And that connection isn't always discussed.
Yeah, that toe movement's interesting because you wonder how much relevance that has to a functional foot, you know, like being able to wave your big toe separate to your other toes. There's a
it's just good for comedy, I think, isn't it?
There's a neurological pathway from our brain to our foot, so we should be able to do it. And I read something the other day saying, like, if you can't, how likely is it that you're using your foot to its full potential when you're functioning? If you can't even send it a message to say move, you know, like if you couldn't straighten your arm, you might wonder how much you're going to be able to function using your arm if you couldn't just do that. And our toes aren't dissimilar to that, but we just lose function. That's another thing that I assess straight away, whether someone has that connection from their brain to their feet. The big toe, we gave up the ability to oppose the other toes so that we could stand up straight using our big toe as a critical thing. And so it has its own nerve supply and 6 of its own muscles. And so we should be able to move it independently of the other toes. The other toes, it's harder to move them independently because they're controlled by the same muscle a lot of the time. The little ones a little bit differently. If we're going to strengthen these muscles and these the muscles in our foot, most of the muscles in our foot attach to our toes. So we want to be able to move the toes if we're going to be able to strengthen the muscles that attach to them, because it's hard to strengthen something unless you can move the joints around it. And so there is some relevance to being able to do that. And it's a good connection as to how connected your brain, it's a good judgment as to how connected your brain is to your feet. And I think worth working on as step one, because if someone comes to me and they've got foot pain and they can't move their toes, that will be their primary homework, part of their primary homework, because I can't load their foot until they can move their toes.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, let's see it as an opportunity rather than something that's a negative over time or whatever.
Yeah.
And then the other thing while you were speaking there, I was thinking of was the sensitivity as well of the feet, because I have I'm sure he won't mind me saying, or maybe he will, but a good friend of mine a couple of years ago, I remember taking off his shoes to walk to a pool when we were on holiday in Italy, and the stones to get over to the pool had quite sharp edges. So given the sharpness, anyone would find it a little bit tricky, but everyone sort of got across okay. But his reaction was his body shape to get there was quite incredible, but also the noises he made were also quite incredible. You know, you hear about that a lot. So when people first start to take off their shoes and experience the ground again and the world, they often find that their feet are really sensitive because they haven't been used to having that. And is that a determinant of, again, a sort of a lack of connection between the sole of the foot and the brain? What does that mean, if you see what I mean?
Like we could go back to when a child first walks and they're in a wide, flat, flexible shoe because it's best for developing their strength, their muscles, their balance, their connection with the earth. They've even got an extra fatty pad that makes their foot look really flat so that they can be as balanced and as stable as possible because they've got this big head on a small body. But then as soon as they turn 3, we put on a shoe that is stiff so they can't feel the ground and cushioned so they can't feel the ground. This is like putting headphones on the 3-year-old and expecting it to still be able to speak when it's 5. Like how are we?
That's a great analogy.
Yeah. How are we teaching it to move in connection with the ground, which is how we move as humans, if we're dampening what our body can feel. Another great analogy was a doctor here in Australia who's sort of what they call an integrative general practitioner. So she's like looking a bit more holistically. And she said to picture this, walking along a beach where you can feel the sun on your skin, you can smell the sea air, you can feel the breeze as well. You can see the sand. Everything is telling you you're on the beach, and you might be in your latest Adidas trainers, say, and your feet, your brain's like, okay, I should be feeling a whole lot of undulations on my feet, but right now, all I'm feeling is what I always feel, and this is a bit weird. Like, what is that telling the brain? The brain's like going, probably, the rest of her quote goes on to say she thinks it's a big cause of lower back pain because our brain's like, well, this is not matching up because I am not feeling that, and I'm going to be super wary of what I am going to feel because I'm worried because I'm not getting this matchup. So that's her explanation for lower back pain.
That makes so much sense.
So does, like, your nervous system just goes into shock. And so
we all know, like that description of my friend walking strangely, that's him on the sharp stones.
Because he's not used to it, yes.
But also that's kind of what your body might be doing to an extent anyway when it hasn't got the information it needs. Yeah.
And so that your friend and I helped at a yoga retreat I do it regularly, and we go out for a barefoot walk, and a similar older guy that probably has been in normal shoes since he was 3, like it's probably 70 years in that shoe. And then we go onto a gravelly surface. We had to pick him up and carry him off the surface because it was just so...
It'd be like walking on fire for him.
Yeah, like his brain was just like, I can't cope with this. And similarly for those children that we put into that shoe, and then it becomes our normal to not feel anything. And that can't be good for our musculoskeletal system that's designed, and our nervous system that's designed to use the sole of our feet as a sensor to some extent for both deep pressure, so uneven surfaces, and for texture as well, and hot and cold, and vibration.
And hot and cold, exactly. Yeah. I know, I always think, when you put your foot on something, so I don't know why I go straight to winter, but when you suddenly put your foot on ice and you haven't noticed there was ice, and your foot has already gone, but if you're wearing footwear of any kind that doesn't sort of let you feel that pretty quickly, you're gone, you're down, because you haven't got, you need such good reaction time for something like ice. And pretend it's not winter and so on. It's the same thing, whereas there's a confused messaging going on. And actually, so that for me says that's when you're more likely to fall anyway. And really,
really similarly is any uneven surface. Because if you can...
Which is even if it's the pavement and there's a slight raise.
And you've got a shoe that is stiff with a stiff a corner on the heel, your brain hasn't even felt the undulation. And so, and then that if you've got a corner on the heel, it's so easy to flick over that corner compared to having a shoe that is more flexible, that lets you, is thinner, so it lets you feel that there's an undulation. So your brain immediately adjusts the whole body so you're less likely to fall. And then the leverage to actually roll your ankle or fall over is far less because you are closer to the ground and you don't have this big square heel on. So that's
and
a
it's
similar
likely
concept.
to have and it's likely to be weaker in that ankle anyway because it's not used to that sort of response it needs to create. And so on up the chain. Hopefully that sort of brings it to life for people a little bit, because usually analogies are such a good way, because it does make you think about your own situation and when you've come across these moments in life and sort of understanding it. And another thing I wanted to talk... Sorry, go on.
Just quickly, we still need to protect our feet from hot, cold and sharp things. But
sure.
It's like if we've got a really sunny day or there's a really bright light, we might put on some glasses, just because you reminded me of analogies. We wouldn't blindfold ourselves. We wouldn't be able to see them. And so conventional shoes are overkill.
I can just see people all walking around completely blind. Oh, the sun's out. I can't see anything.
So conventional shoes are overkill for protecting our feet. It's like we've gone, our feet are a fault. There's something wrong with them inherently, and we need to support them and control them and cushion them, because obviously when we were evolved or designed, whatever your belief system is, they mucked up on the feet, and we had to do something different with them.
So in the way that orthotics are, in theory, there to help you move differently because they are sort of doing the bit of the work for the foot, almost traditional shoes are supposedly doing that for you, but in fact the opposite's happening.
Well, they are. Well, they kind of are doing it for you, and therefore you don't do it yourself, and therefore you lose that ability, and then that's what happens. Yeah,
the opposite's happening in your body. You're actually it's making it harder rather than easier.
There's a bit of a little shift in orthotic theory lately that I'm aware of. We used to think it was changing like alignment, but now the people that make them have changed their reason why they work. Probably because they worked out they didn't change alignment, which was pretty black and white. They didn't change alignment too much. They now say that they just modify load. And they probably do, because if you put someone on a scan with and without the orthotic, it does change the load through the foot. And so that can be useful if someone's injured.
Okay.
And so you might use it as a tool if someone's injured to decrease the load around that injury. But then you should be rehabilitating that area. And so I would say 999 out of 1,000 orthotics should have an exit plan. They shouldn't be there permanently.
Right.
You should put them in place while you're unloading an area and building it up again with some exercise program, so that you don't and then move on, because they're not used for alignment for something inherently wrong with your foot. They're supposedly just now used to change load.
Right. Okay. That's interesting. And to even hear the words that it's important to have an exit plan. I mean, if you think about when something goes wrong in your body and you have to put it in a cast or something similar, you're not going to leave it like that forever. And you're certainly going to rehab it afterwards, because you take off that cast and the muscles have completely atrophied. They've withered away often if it's a long term, and you've got to build everything back and get that function right. So it's slightly different, but in the same way, it's important to see it as a temporary thing that's helping you. And presumably you're talking about then using exercises and so on when you're not using that orthotic, when the foot is just barefoot, training that way? Or I
still hardly prescribe orthotics, like very, very rarely. And I doubt the podiatrists that are prescribing the orthotics to offload something are doing much effort in the rehab side of things, because it is in their interest most of the time to leave that client in the orthotic, unfortunately.
Yeah, which is yes.
Yeah, that's a negative vibe that we don't need to go into so much, but I think that still happens a lot. But there's some podiatrists that don't do that so much. But
yeah, but it's worth having that as a perspective, so that you go in with that sort of healthy questioning curiosity. If you're in that situation, you go to someone to just say, I've heard there's another school of thought. What do you think about that?
That's right. What's my exit plan? Yeah.
Exactly. Because I don't want this in fact, my father-in-law, who has just turned 80, a few years ago, we took his orthotics out of his shoes that he'd had for about 30 years, which is really bad because we don't know what we're talking about at all. But we said to him, do you think they really help? And he said, I don't know. So we took them out, and he started walking more upright. He said, oh, no, it's quite comfortable, actually. Put them in the bin there and then. So something that perhaps you thought you needed and, you couldn't function well
I'm
otherwise.
a perfect example of that personally. Like I thought I needed them. I'd change them from shoe to shoe. I would get lower back pain if I didn't have them in. But when I took them out, I properly and worked on strengthening my lower back and being more mobile and being a human, I didn't even think about my lower back pain,
Yeah. No, it's so interesting and great for you to say it. You're one of the most important people to say that when it's in relation to the feet. So you've talked a lot about bunions, which is a common thing. And we'll talk about just briefly a couple of other things. But someone who's got bunions, and I hear about it a lot. My husband has bunions. His identical twin had bunions because he had surgery, which... how that's gone, I'm not sure. He has Achilles issues and so on still now, but he's not in barefoot either. So there's stuff going on there. But for people who have bunions, particularly midlife and older, so it's been a long time. It's affected their shoes. They've probably got bits sticking out in their shoes and so on. Is it possible without surgery? Because who wants to really go to surgery? I presume that would also be your suggestion. Is it possible for people to go and get help to sort of retrain that alignment of the big toe? And actually, can you just describe to people what it actually is? Because a lot of people think it's a big bone spur, and isn't particularly related to the big toe. So if you could describe that, would be helpful.
So I might even use my foot.
Go on then. Let's see. But we need to talk about it as well as show it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for the people on the thing. So if you think about the bones leading into the base of your toes, they're often parallel, but someone with a bunion will have a genetic predisposition to have a wider space between the bones that lead into the toes. And so that's a genetic predisposition you can do nothing about except for have surgery to have it straightened. And the other genetic predisposition is joint mobility. So women have more bunions because they're generally more mobile, or just general joint mobility. They're genetic predispositions for that happening, for a bunion to happen, that you can't do much about. Now, if we look at unshod populations, so these are people that don't wear shoes. There's still some of them about. They have a far less incidence of bunions. They still have the same incidence of first, second metatarsal angle increases, but they just don't have bunions. They just have wide splayed feet because they didn't put a shoe on. There's even a study that's happening at the moment in Sri Lanka that's looking at kids that are 10 that because they don't go to school till they're about 12, or don't have to wear a school shoe until they're about 12. So looking at 10-year-olds and their 13-year-old siblings and seeing the difference in their feet. So that
in 3 years.
In 3 years, because of the wearing of shoes, because nearly all shoes, when you put that foot that's got a wider first, second metatarsal angle and mobility at the joint into a conventional shoe, it pushes the big toe sideways towards the other toes, and that's what a bunion is. And so traditionally we do surgery because you can then realign that angle. There's muscles on the inside of the big toe that are tight, and on the outside of the big toe that are loose, and so they tighten the ones that are loose or weak. They tighten the ones that are loose, release the ones that are tight in surgery. But it's a horrible surgery to have, and it's really not recommended. I mostly see the failed ones, or I help people rehab after the surgery, or I do prehab for those that end up having surgery because their deformities got so great they're still going to have surgery, but we do work to make them stronger so they get out of surgery better. But so now, if we just change the environment, like if the environment is what triggers a bunion, if we change the environment, the shoe, then we give the big toe the best opportunity to work the way it should. My wife's a really good example of this. There are 4 stages of bunions, and she only had stage 1 into deformity, but she had a lot of pain. And she would never do an exercise that I might suggest for her. Never wear toe spacers, which I might suggest for her. But she did take on, never, ever. But she did take on the wearing.
We so know this story.
That's right. She did take on the wearing of wide shoes. And over a 4-year period, her toes are straighter and she has far less pain.
Right.
And if she does occasionally have pain, I say, "Did you do your exercise?" And she says no, and then I don't hear about it for a little while. But that's a different story. Anyway, just changing the environment is number one thing to do. There are things called toe spacers, which you can find all over eBay and online and all this type of things. These are things that realign your toes by wearing them. There are some that are hugely aggressive, and there are some that are a bit more gentle. I like the gentle type, obviously.
So describe what gentle, if someone was going to look for what gentle means.
There's some aggressive ones that when you have to put a brace on and then you twist it and crank it out, and I really do not recommend that. And then
I've never seen that.
One size fits all silicone ones, and they're still pretty aggressive, but they can be worn when you're barefoot around home. And then there's some more gentle ones that are almost like that kinesio tape that the tennis players wear on their elbows. That doesn't change the way they elbow moves, but it just brings awareness to certain muscles in the area to change the way they. And so there's some spaces like that. Most people that want to do something about this would start with the middle ones, the silicone ones that are one size fits all. They're not expensive, and you can just wear them around home. And you'll notice, even just wearing them for 2 hours, you take them off and your feet are straighter. And then you go and put them back in the shoes that squash them up, and it's a bit counterproductive. And you're like, you start questioning the whole process.
And if you've worn them for a little bit, and it's really quite uncomfortable, that's great information that, your toes are struggling to have that splay, and therefore definitely take them off.
Yeah.
But try again. Don't let it put you off.
That's right. And yeah, so you're better off just doing a little bit to start with and building up. And then there's, again, some good research showing that most people have pain in their bunions because they don't know what is happening. And so lack of education. So just finding out this information is helpful for your pain as well. But there are also exercises, this is what I do as my job pretty much on a daily basis, which strengthen the muscles on the inside of the bunion and release the muscles on the outside of the bunion, so that we are rehabilitating the joint as we would a knee or a hip or a back. We make muscles stronger to support the joint in a way that's conducive to good movement. And so definitely bunions can be addressed without surgery.
Yeah.
In most cases, not always. And orthotics have been used a lot because when we have a bunion, our big toe pushed sideways, the inside of the foot becomes unstable because we don't have that support, like we talked about in balance before, that support system of having a straight big toe. And an orthotic creates this support that the bunion, the foot with the bunion is missing. And so podiatrists think, we should provide that support. That'll stop the bunion or stop it getting worse. It's a bit like putting it's just a Band-Aid. It's not really going to fix it. It's just...
again, the cast, isn't it? It's the cast thing where you're then reliant on the cast.
Yeah, that's right. It's actually not helping the situation at all. They'll put it in a shoe that is encouraging the bunion, which is they don't ever question the shoe. So,
which is just, to me, it's just total madness.
Yeah, like I'm preaching to the converted when I'm speaking to you, Wendy.
You are, but
those that
so many people are not.
Just
absolutely.
Open the brain to how your foot should be designed to be supported. It's not designed to be supported, and how it's designed to be protected. And that's a wide, thin, flat, flexible shoe, a shoe that just lets your foot do its thing.
Katie Bowman always talks about walking around with sort of gloves on, which it kind of isn't enough for me. It's more like, ski gloves that are really sort of thick, or biker's gloves that really don't let you do very much because all you're doing is gripping on ski poles.
Yeah.
It's kind of like doing that to your feet all the time, where it's kind of then hard to do anything with them because they're sort of locked into a position. Which, that it makes sense. And I think once you get used to being barefoot, even just around the home initially, and then outdoors more, and then you start to think along these lines, well, I wonder what that would do for my XYZ that's happening in my body, then just that curiosity, starting, like you were saying, just even the knowledge that there's something you can do about your bunions can help the pain, because everything's driven by this gray matter up here. It's the same where when we start to sort of sense into how something feels in the foot, in the body. I always try with my clients to sort of talk about the before and after. How did it feel before? How did it feel afterwards? To try and create that nice feedback loop to say, this was a good thing to do, or this feels better, or even if it's the slightest movement forward, because we want to push those positive signals in, because we're so good at pushing the negative in, or focusing on the pain, focusing on what's going wrong, focusing what we can't do. So we kind of need to override that. We're, in some ways the brain can be quite a simple thing in that sense. So it's important to push in as much positive as we can.
Yeah, for sure. And a little simple thing that someone could do at home is do some calf raises, like both legs, calf raises, not single leg, holding onto something. It's not about being balanced in this case. So you can hold onto a wall or a bench or something, and notice if they're pushing off through their big toe or if they're pushing off on the outside of the foot. So many people push off on the outside of the foot, which is not designed to take the load. And then bring some weight do a few reps like that. Notice where the weight's going through as you're pushing off. And then do some reps with the weight through the big toe. And then maybe grab some rubber bands, some elastic bands from, when the post comes, when it used to come with rubber bands around it. And put them around your toes so that they pull your toes straight, and see how it feels to embrace your toe going straight. Because again, even if you don't have a bunion, nearly everyone's big toe is not straight because of conventional shoes. Going straight with the load through it, this is how we're meant to push off. It's a highly effective and powerful pushing off. That is called, actually in podiatry terms, it's called high gear push off compared to low gear push off through the outside of the foot. And so to understand what I'm talking about here is to do that kind of exercise and realize how efficient you can be to push off through your big toes rather than the outside of your foot. Yeah.
I'm going to get on my class next time I do my class. Everyone bring an elastic band. We're going to do a test. Let's see. No, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
The other one pathology I really wanted to talk to you about, again, that comes up time and time again, is plantar fasciitis.
Yeah.
Because it feels like it's kind of a bit of an unknown as to why it happens, and people live with it for years and years, which, you know, that is it's a chronic pain when it gets into that state that really affects, I think, absolutely how you move and how you see life and how you the things that you want to do in life, because you feel so restricted by this pain. So can you describe just a little bit what it is, and again your thoughts on how to help?
So plantar fascia is this connective tissue across the sole of the foot, and as we push up through our big toe, sorry to harp on the big toe, it's meant to tighten and create and pull the bones together so our foot is rigid to help us propel ourselves. It's not meant to do that job on its own. There are many little foot muscles that are meant to be helping it. And the calf is also meant to be helping it as well. So if we go back a step and look at people with plantar fasciitis, we know that they've got weak foot muscles and weak calf muscles, and they're often overweight as well. The overweight bit's like another realm that I obviously express to my clients, but when it comes to the foot specifics, we need to make sure we're strong enough in the calf and strong enough in the foot muscles. Why are our foot muscles weak? Well, if we're wearing a shoe that's stiff that stops most of the joints in our feet from moving, then the muscles that cross those joints aren't going to be doing any work, like you were saying before, a cast on your arm. And so those muscles aren't going to be doing their job to help the plantar fascia, and the plantar fascia gets overloaded. And then we get this thing. It's not really an itis. They call it now plantar fasciopathy because it's more of a thickening of the plantar fascia.
Right.
And so this thickening of the plantar fascia might create some inflammation around it, and then it just is there because a lot of the time the treatments are orthotics, which only further stops those little foot muscles working. Cortisone injections, that wipes out any pain in the area, but it's just a Band-Aid. We might use shockwave therapy, which is something that they use to create a new inflammatory response so that your body knows to heal the area because it's been there for so long. Reminds it. Yeah, that's right. Hardly ever rehab. Obviously, I focus on rehab, so we do foot strength work, we do calf strength work, we change the shoes so that the foot has to move. It can still be very, very hard to get rid of. It's probably like when I see that someone's coming in with that, I'm like, oh, this could go on for a while. Like it's a
long road.
It's a long road. But even knowing that, because you know what, there's really good research that shows that if you have someone with plantar fasciitis or plantar heel pain, say, 12 months later, nearly everyone's better. Whether you had orthotics, rehab, cortisone, shockwave therapy, dry needling, foot mobilization therapy, any of the foot treatments that are going around, nearly everyone is better after 12 months, no matter what they did. And so I often start my conversation saying, your body has got this in control. It's trying to heal it. We just have to create an environment that encourages its healing. Because I could say your exercise is going to help it, or the shockwave therapy, or one of these things is going to help it. But I don't want you to be reliant upon that to fix your heel pain. I don't want you to get heel pain in 3 years' time and say, oh, last time I had a cortisone injection, I need to go for another one. That's what fixed me. What fixed you is your body. And personally, I think having a stronger calf and stronger feet means you're going to be less likely to get it again. So you can say, if it comes back again, oh, I need to go back and do my exercises. Like, have some self-reliance, So that's the way I look at it. That's the big conversation. But nearly everyone's better after 12 months. So your body's got it under control. All the other stuff I call do something-isms. Like you're just doing something to fill in the gap. If that's exercise, well, you're going to come out feeling a whole lot better. There's something recently for shoulder pain, people doing calf raises and it helps their shoulder pain. Exercise, as you would know, is the cure-all for most musculoskeletal thing and other ailments. Whether you're doing an exercise
just
for your foot, your shoulder, your neck, it's just going to help all of the things.
Yeah. And it is all linked. Ultimately, it's very hard to completely and utterly isolate one small area. And when it's something like the foot, the heel, the ankle, and that's where the pain is. I mean, how could you not move the calf further up the leg? Right, it's impossible, and
Yeah.
yet we've become so reductionist. Everything has been really put in boxes of the body, and I see it in myself. Sometimes I'm like, sort of do these movements for the hip, and it is for the hip. It could really help with your hip, but it's going to help with lots of other things
That's
too. I'm
right.
just not
Yeah.
saying that.
Yeah.
Kind of like this will help with whole body.
Yeah.
No, people are not going to buy it, even though it actually is.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. Thank you so much for talking to us. It's been really, really fascinating to hear all your thoughts, and it is an alternative perspective, but to me, it should be the the mainstream. And what you're doing is a fantastic job. So I'm going to be putting your Instagram account, obviously, in the show notes. You do a lot of work with the Foot Collective, so I will also put their handle in there, because just scroll down a few and listen to the thoughts, the different alternative point of view, and it might just sow a seed where you become more curious and you choose to do different. I think I'm very much of the mind that we need to make things really accessible and really practical, because although I'm really into natural movement, I really talk about it as sort of daily life movement, because I think when we do these sort of comparisons with early man, even though they're 100% relevant, they just aren't in people's current lived experience life. And therefore, when you would say, talking about tribes who don't wear shoes, well, people will just automatically, as I did before I got in pain, say, well, we don't do that. Why would we do that? We've got shoes now. And so it's just hopefully making people more curious, questioning, thinking about the effects of these modern life conveniences we've got in this concept, shoes, otherwise chairs, the way we live, to try and work out, just know what they're doing and be able to make a choice and a change if you want to. So thank you for sharing your knowledge on all of that.
That's okay. You call it an alternative view, but I think if you look at sleep, diet, movement, and community, we're realizing that the way we were designed to do it or evolved to do it is the right way. That's the way our body, like our genetics haven't really changed in a very short period of time because of industrialization, and our feet should be along for that ride as well. You mentioned the Foot Collective, and you're in the UK. They're coming over in August, September to do a guide program. It's like the ultimate learning about how your feet move. And so if you're a movement professional or someone that just wants to really deep dive into movement and foot related stuff, it would be a great course to do through the Foot Collective. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. That's great. Well, if there's a link to that, I'd love it if you could share it so I could put it in the notes as well. That'd be really, really useful. So in terms of, so if you're someone who's listening to this, just fascinated and interested, perhaps to, have never really worn too constrictive a shoe, always quite liked being barefoot around the house, let's say, or on the beach, whatever, but are realizing that potentially for people around them are getting problems, or the next generation have had significant problems. What would you say is the best thing for sort of preventative movements to keep that foot nice and healthy and in its sort of natural foot function, as you call it?
The ultimate is to wear a shoe that allows that to happen. And that's a wide shoe to the tips of the toes. It's flat, so from heel to toe. A little heel is negotiable, I think, but the width is not negotiable, because some people have been in high heels, and so to go to a fully flat shoe is a bit much, It should be flexible, semi-flexible at least, so the foot can move, and you should be able to feel something. And they're a huge market of these now, 140 brands around the world, and there's some that have some cushioning. So if you're worried about going without your cushioning, then you can get one that's got some cushioning and it still moves. They're highly readable. They're readily available. And so that's a habitual, like you talked about, easily accessible habitual changes. Like changing your footwear is something that can benefit your feet without doing any exercises, without doing anything else, just by using your feet the way they're designed to, by using a shoe that doesn't change the way they're designed to move. That's the number one thing to do.
And you can do that by and the cost of them is coming down. It has always been quite expensive in the past. The cost is coming down, but you can do that by trying a barefoot shoe, and not all the time, just literally trying it. Going out for a very short walk, taking your normal shoes with you, but just trying it. And again, doing that assessment thing. I said, how is it? How did it feel before? How do I feel after? How does it feel during? And is it okay? And just see if you, because you might be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, give it time. You might have been in conventional shoes for 50 years. It's going to be a long time to untrain your feet to be used to those. So there's no rush, and use it for going to the cafe rather than going for the 3-hour shopping trip, or use it to go to the gym when you're super conscious of the way you move, rather than going for the walk with your friends where you're chatting the whole time for 3 hours and just walking the whole time and not thinking about the way you move. So just be really mindful, and there's no rush. There's no rush at all. Just take it pardon the pun, but just take it one step at a time.
Step at a time. Love that. Perfect place to end.
That's right.
I was going to ask you, do you have a list of barefoot shoes anywhere where you recommend brands or anything, or do you know of a good resource for people that they could?
So someone, like, there's now about 5 big accounts around the world, that Instagram accounts that have great lists. I still lean towards Anya's reviews, ANYAS reviews, just because that's the one that's been around. She puts a lot of education out there as well. She just had a big barefoot shoe expo in Chicago that I went to, which was unbelievable, to meet all these people that are that way inspired. But I think what I really learned as well, that shoes aren't always enough. You have to be doing the exercises, which is where you come in, Wendy, to teach people how to move So she's a great resource. In the UK, you've got Vivo Barefoot. That's where they're from. So there's shops that have them. Ultra is a really good, it's ALTRA. That's a very good transition shoe. I put more people in that shoe than any other shoe because it has cushioning. They've got some really chunky models, which I shy away from, but they've got some lower, less cushion models, but still plenty of cushioning. They'll be readily available in the UK as well. Yeah. And then the other person that I should shout out to is Rena Harris. She's in London. She's a podiatrist just like me, and she does work just like this. So if someone's having foot issues and wants this approach, she's the go-to in London.
Perfect. That's great. Brilliant. Thank you. I'll grab all of those off afterwards. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Andy. Really grateful. It was really, really interesting.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you've enjoyed listening, and if you have, you can help by doing 3 things. First, press the follow button to tell podcast platforms you want to listen again. Second, please give the show a 5-star rating and leave a review about why you liked it. And third, I'd love you to share it with friends and family or on your socials, for which I'm truly thankful. Finally, if this podcast is making you want to start reclaiming your own movement, join me in the Reclaim Movement membership for classes, both live and by replay, and countless videos of mini movement breaks to add into your daily life, covering practical and fun, important natural movements. Visit reclaimmovement.co.uk/membership to get started with your 7-day free trial. See you for the next episode, and thank you so much for listening.